Alderneys Key FM.
William Tate, the President, how are you?
Very well, as always, Dougal, thank you.
Good. And everything, quite a lot to talk about, I'm sure, this morning.
Yes. Shall I get cracking?
Yes, please. That would be very nice, thank you.
Okay, right. Well, let's deal firstly with the medical situation. As of yesterday afternoon, there were 252 positive cases of COVID-19 in the bailiwick, again, all on the island of Guernsey. The number of deaths is still 13, and 3 other deaths where COVID-19 was not the primary cause, but is thought to have been a factor. Anyone who is listening to these announcements will have noticed 2 things. Firstly, there has been no change in the last 48 hours to the number of positive cases, which Dr. Brink, in fact, said yesterday at the media briefing. We've now had 5 days without any positive cases, which again just emphasises that her strategy is working. Secondly, the number of deaths due to COVID-19 remains the same, but the number of other deaths where COVID-19 was thought to be present has been revised down from 4 to 3. This is because post-mortem testing established that in one case, COVID-19 was not actually present. So not that that will be any comfort at all, but it just goes to show that they're keeping on the right side of this, and they've made those tests, and that was the outcome. So looking at it as a whole, we can clearly see a very positive trend. So that it's working, but we must not, as Gavin St. Pierre said yesterday, and as I've said in the newsletter, we can't be complacent. So yes, yesterday was something of a landmark day, I think, for all of us in this, because Guernsey, once ahead, got ahead of the game with a lot of jurisdictions and actually published their exit from lockdown framework. And I think the first thing I'd like to do is emphasise the word framework, because this isn't a document written in stone. This is a roadmap, a direction of travel, but as Dr. Brink made very clear, the information in that document may change because of circumstances. So it's a really good place to start. So we all know where we are now, where we're going, what it looks like. However, we have to bear in mind that any of this could change depending upon circumstances. So I was busy this morning sitting at my table working out how I was going to try and boil this down to the essential bits which I thought were important, because there was a wealth of information that was published yesterday. And lo and behold, on the door arrived the latest newsletter. And on page 4 of the newsletter, under the title, "Where do we go from here?" there is a very, very good summary which has been made of all the information that was available yesterday. And that, of course, as we know, will be delivered to every house on the island. So again, we've really got ahead here, because this is information that was only released yesterday, and within 24 hours, it should be in your home. So again, it just demonstrates the commitment and the speed at which we can move as an island, so that everybody gets that information and can study it, rather than just listening to me sort of paraphrase what it's all about. And it's complicated, but if you have access to the internet, I would thoroughly recommend that you go on to the gov.gg coronavirus website. There are 2 documents that have been published. One is the framework for exiting the lockdown, and there's some 50 pages of that. But there's also an exit infographic. Now, that is 19 pages, and I've copied it, and I've got it in front of me now, and it is an incredible document, because it explains everything in a way in which we can all understand. So it's not full of statistics and medical language. It's been aimed in a way where all of us can get a really good idea of where we are and where we're going. So I think that's a really, really important document. And again, it really just emphasizes how lucky we are to be able to access the skills and the levels of professionalism in Guernsey, because this is really a joint effort amongst the Committee for Health and Social Care, Dr. Brink, Gavin St. Pierre, and the civil service, who bring all of this together and put it out there in a way in which it's accessible to the people. And again, it's another demonstration of how, at the very forefront of all of this, has been the understanding that we, the community, needs to understand what's happening. We need to be able to support the people who are making these difficult decisions. And I think, again, we are so very, very lucky to have this effort led by Dr. Brink. And I have to say, if I was Boris Johnson doing my press conferences every day, I would have poached Dr. Brink a long time ago, because she has the ability, again, to explain things to us in a way in which we can understand. And in my career, I've come across many, many consultants and scientists who didn't have that ability. So it's that ability to be able to connect with people and feel as if she's talking to you that gives us all the confidence to support her and not to unnecessarily challenge the approach that she's taken. So again, and I make no apologies actually for saying it, but we should recognise what a debt of gratitude we owe to Guernsey for steering us through what are incredibly difficult times. So I'm not going to go into masses of detail, because I think you will get a good sense of where we are from the newsletter. But I think really just to underpin how we've got here and what the thinking has been, I'm going to read the media release that was released yesterday, and that's entitled Full Exit from Lockdown. The States of Guernsey has released its Full Exit from Lockdown framework document, explaining how it intends to gradually relax the COVID-19 restrictions. The document also looks at what triggers would allow the bailiwick to move to the next phase of easing restrictions, or if necessary, return to a more strict set of lockdown measures. It is hoped that by publishing this document in full, islanders will have a clearer understanding of how the state intends to return safely to normality and the reasoning behind the various steps that will get the bailiwick there. Deputy Heidi Salisbury, President of the Health and Social Care Committee, said, "Since this pandemic began, we have shared as much of the information that we have used to make our decisions as possible with islanders, so they understand why we are making them. We need to do the same over the coming weeks and months. As we move through the various phases and restrictions are lifted, we'll be asking islanders to do slightly different things each time in both their work and personal life. They've been superb, and I'm incredibly grateful for how the whole community has supported our strategy so far. But if we want people to keep working with us, they need to know why they are being asked to make each of these adjustments. That is why publishing the framework is so important." Deputy Gavin St. Pierre, Chair of the Civil Contingencies Authorities, said, "This framework for moving out of lockdown will be led by our public health data and analysis, and our first priority is absolutely protecting the health and lives of islanders. But this also means avoiding the health impacts of being more restrictive than is necessary at each stage. It is a difficult balance to strike." The economic impact, which clearly has its own impact on our health and well-being, is also incredibly important. And for each phase, we have considered how jobs and livelihoods, businesses and public funds will be affected. As we move forward, it is harder to separate the health, social and economic issues we need to consider, as they all have an effect on each other. The framework takes in all aspects of bailiwick life to give us the best chance of returning to normality quickly, minimising the loss of life and the cost in terms of jobs and livelihood. The backbone of the strategy is to test, trace and quarantine while easing restrictions. This has already proved an effective strategy, particularly because of the on-island testing capability to test at high levels and receive results quickly. Options for further increasing this capacity are being explored. So in broad terms, this strategy will allow us to monitor signs of spread of the virus in the community. Where evidence shows falling numbers of cases of community seeding and there are no signs of clusters of cases developing over a 4-week period, this will trigger a move to the next phase with restrictions further relaxed. Similarly, if in a 4-week period the number of cases from community seeding exceeds 10 or clusters do emerge, it would trigger a move to the previous phase with increased lockdown restrictions brought back in. Other triggers are also detailed in the framework, such as an increase in hospital admissions or the loss of the on-island testing capability. Director of Public Health Dr. Nicola Brink said, "Our strategy to test, contact trace, quarantine has been really effective, and we're seeing our number of active cases fall to very low numbers, which is very encouraging. But we cannot be complacent, and it's quite possible we won't see a straight line forward through the phases, and instead we'll need to move back into earlier phases at some point. The way the community has worked with us in observing the restrictions so far is a big reason why we're moved into phase 2, and we'll need the community support and cooperation to keep moving forward through the phases. The exit from lockdown framework is not a final document and will be adjusted as circumstances change or as our understanding of the coronavirus improves. It therefore should be treated as a live document, and the plans laid out for the various phases, particularly the later phases, are provisional. The framework is not the same as a recovery plan, though clearly there is overlap, and both pieces of work need to be developed with the overall COVID-19 response in mind. However, the plan for the bailiwick's recovery will likely need to look in more detail at economic support measures, and will need to take a longer-term view, as it's very likely the island will still be recovering after the lockdown restrictions have been lifted. This framework does not include plans for the phased return to normality for schools and education. The reopening of schools is subject to further detailed consideration based on complex assessments. Further information to support the transition for exiting from lockdown on a phased basis as it applies to educational and early years learning, nurseries, childminders, etc., will be made available when possible. While the framework sets out a phased exit from lockdown for the bailiwick, tailored measures may be added for Alderney and Sark specific for those jurisdictions, as is the case currently. So that press release ends with a particularly positive element for us because there is now a recognition that it may be, as we've talked about before, that part of this recovery plan will need to be tweaked so that it applies to Alderney in a slightly different way from Guernsey. But that is an ongoing conversation, and any changes, of course, will only take place if they are supported by the scientific evidence and if they are manageable within the framework of the exit of the bailiwick as a whole. So we've got reasons there to be encouraged. So that's a sort of brief overview of the thinking behind it, because I think it's really important that we understand that. It's always important that you know why people do things, not just when they do them. So as we move through the phases from our current position in phase 2, there will be the possibility that we'll need to step back a phase or even back to full lockdown. So it could be one step forward, one step back, or we could continue moving in a positive direction. And of course, that will determine what the time frame of this is. And there are, in this document that I've told you about, the time frames are roughly set out as to how we will move from each phase. And I'll just very briefly give it you, because I know I've had some calls from people actually trying to understand what the timescale looks like. But bear in mind, please, that this is a provisional timescale. This will happen if all the things which are anticipated fall into place, but the times could be shortened or lengthened depending upon the factors that I've told you about. So moving into phase 3 from where we are now, there will have to be a consecutive 4-week rolling period from the 25th of April. And the document sets out what might happen to get us there, but at the moment I just want to briefly just run through the timescale. So that would be 4 weeks from the 25th of April to get us to phase 3. Now, phase 3 is interesting because in the previous 8 consecutive weeks in phase 2 with no community transition may count towards this total. So we can actually, from phase 2 to 3, carry forward. If we've got 4 weeks where we've had no problems, then that can be carried forward, and that can be used as part of the 8-week period. So that would reduce it by half. So the minimum time in phase 3 is 4 weeks, and the maximum is not set, as it requires 8 consecutive weeks of no community transmission. So it is complicated, but it just gives you an idea of the thinking. So when we move from phase 3 to phase 4, the current thinking is that in the previous 8 weeks, that the same principles apply for moving forward, but you can't carry forward any weeks from phase 3. So that would have to be a period of 8 weeks. Then to get to phase 5, it would be a further 4 weeks, and then we would then move to phase 6. So it just gives you a rough idea of the thinking. And I think, there are 2 ways we can look at this. We can either say, okay, well, we'd like it to have been a lot quicker than that, but by the same token, we're in the privileged position at the moment of not having had a case of COVID-19 on the island, and that has to be our priority moving forward. So that sort of timescale, which is very measured and is dependent upon science, is a way, I think, that protects us, but also slowly relaxes those restrictions so we can all move towards getting back to life as we know it. So it could be longer, it could be shorter. It depends on circumstances. So none of this, as I said at the outset, is fixed in stone. It's a moving target, and it's a live document, I think was the expression that was used yesterday. So I downloaded this, and I shall see how it compares to actually where we get, and I'll sort of bring those comparisons to you as we move into each phase. So, okay, what will it look like if we move to phase 3? That could be, Deputy Soulsby said yesterday, as little as 2.5 weeks away. Well, recreation time would be increased. There would be further relaxation for businesses, including making food takeaways available, and some non-essential retail businesses being open to customers as long as there is social distancing. Public venues such as libraries and museums may be able to open, and churches may be open for private prayer but not for services. Our social bubble may be expanded again by opening up to more households as long as we do not extend beyond the agreed number of households. So this represents another step towards what we would consider to be normal. Now, just around the bubbles, there's been quite a bit of confusion about this. You can't chop and change. So when you have selected your bubble with which you want to join, then until the regulations and guidance changes, that is your bubble. So hence why people will need to think very carefully about who they want to share their homes with, but it has to be within the home and it has to be the same people. So it's not easy, but it's just another small step back to integration and back to us being able to spend time with people that we know and love. So that will probably be extended in phase 3. The detail on future phases beyond phase 3 is not clear, but phase 4 might see hairdressers, beauticians and restaurants being able to reopen. But of course for restaurants that would involve maintaining social distance, as we experienced at the beginning of this process, where if you go into a restaurant, sit at a table but not congregate at the bar. Phase 5 will feel much more like normal, with pubs and restaurants back to normal, travel within the bailiwick unrestricted. So we cannot travel to Guernsey unless it is essential travel until phase 4. And that again is a protective measure. So travel will be restricted, but it will be allowed within the bailiwick bubble. So to all intents and purposes, that would pretty much be life as normal here, with the only exception that we wouldn't be opening the borders to neighbouring countries. So that, I think, will represent as near to normal as we're going to get, and we then move to phase 6. Now, this is the million-dollar question. At what point is it safe to move to phase 6? And the view that is being taken is that that would be dependent upon either a vaccine being identified, or alternatively, we were satisfied with the measures that were in place in our neighbouring jurisdictions. So that is one which will be a very, very difficult decision to make, but we have to be sure that in opening up our borders, we are not opening up our borders again to the infection. So it would be very sad if we got back to normal, opened the borders too soon, and then found that we were back in the position we found ourselves in March. But I think we can have every confidence that Dr. Brink and her team will ensure that all the massive progress, all the sacrifices we've made, all the adjustments we've had to make are not thrown away just because we think, well, we'll give it a go. So I think we can all be really confident about that. So all in all, and in summary, from a personal point of view, I am incredibly pleased at the way in which Dr. Brink and her team have delivered these documents and have shared the information with us. And I think we can all just have a bit lighter step as we move around the island doing our exercise or whatever else we do. I think we can really see now that the way forward is clearer, that we can start to feel more positive about the future. And if everything continues to go as it is, although there will still be sacrifices, we'll still have to think carefully about personal hygiene and about social distancing, but in the end, it may be that we are now in a position where we are in control and not being controlled by a virus. So that's all the sort of scientific stuff and the interpretation. Please download, if you can, this info document. Read carefully the newsletter, and I think then you will be as informed as you could possibly be about exactly where we are. So just one or two housekeeping matters. I mentioned, I think on Monday, that Roger Fulbrook had written to the Daily Mail beseeching them to send their Spitfire over Alderney to celebrate VE Day, but he rang me this morning to say, unhappily, he thinks he's probably been unsuccessful because where it is going to fly, I understand, is over the southeast, where there is a hospital where Spitfire pilots were treated during the war. So I think we can certainly say that that is a very appropriate way to recognise that. And interestingly, for those who remember Jim Morgan from whom we bought our house, he trained Spitfire pilots in the RAF during the war. He went over to Canada, and I've spent many happy hours sitting with him, having, as he used to call it, a jaw about his experiences during those times. So as I said to Roger this morning, it's really weird here that, we have so many life experiences all in such a small place. And the people that perhaps have had the most extreme experiences are the ones that you would least expect. I remember Rosemary and Philip James, who travelled overland back to the UK from India, and they have stories to tell that you would not believe. So, these are all the sorts of things which we can celebrate, we can remember, and we can remember the good things whilst recognising the terrible sacrifices that had to be made and the assault upon our democratic way of life. And we're going to honour that in our own way on Friday. Again, this is very much now on Dougal's shoulders because he has to make sure that it's all delivered. I told you before, and it's in the newsletter, and I've tried to get it as widely as I can, that we're going to have an hour-long radio programme on Friday, which will be Alderney's way of celebrating VE Day at a time when we can't all get together and have that party at the Island Hall. So we're going to have bells, we're going to have pipes, we're going to have bugles, we're going to have singers, we're going to have memories, and all of those things put together, I think, in a very Alderney way, is an incredibly fitting tribute to those who suffered and lost their lives. And I had an uncle of mine who was captured in Dunkirk. His wife was told he was lost in action. He was taken to a prisoner of war camp. He escaped. He was put back into a prisoner of war camp. He escaped again and then had to spend a prolonged period of time in a cattle truck in a tunnel by way of punishment. So I always looked at him in a very different way as a child, but there was always something about him which you could tell that he hadn't come back the man that everybody knew. But having said that, he came back and rebuilt his life, taught himself the mandolin whilst he was in the prisoner of war camp, so he used to entertain us all. So, they're just personal memories and the connections from, the baby boom generation who were born during or shortly after the war. So, I still feel very close to Uncle Dick, and I still look back and think of what his life must have been like during the time and afterwards. So, and of course, his wife, having told he was dead, then suddenly found out that he was alive. So, these personal stories really create the right atmosphere around celebrating things like this, and I'm sure everybody's got their own. So forgive me for just reminiscing a bit, but I think it's important that we see the challenges we're facing now in the context of what previous generations have gone through, and we've never faced anything like this, but thankfully we've never had to face a war like our forefathers did. So this is our challenge as a humanity, and I think we can say how well we, as an island, have responded to that challenge. So please, if you can, tune in. We're going to have a toast to the nation at some point during it, so please toast with whatever is your beverage of choice, and we'll raise a glass collectively to all those who gave their lives and suffered in order that we can live as we do now. So I think, Dougal, I'm sorry I've gone on a bit this morning, but it's difficult stuff, but it's important that we can do it in a way that people understand and feel taken along with the journey. So I hope that people will forgive me for that.
Yeah, thank you, William. And no, that's very good. And what you've just proven this morning is about our true Alderney spirit, which is very, very important. And just a little bit about Friday. From 9:30 through till 10, I'm going to play some World War II songs leading up to 10 o'clock. So I'm going to add that little bit in, and hopefully that'll prime us nicely for what's to happen between 10 and 11. And just on that point, at 11 o'clock on Friday, there will be a 2-minute silence at 11, and straight after we will then hear the bells of St Anne's just to finish it all off.
And I think we'll then be inviting everybody to step outside, clap, blow
Cheer.
their horns, do anything they want, just to collectively, as an island, just get it all in one place.
And I know that will happen, William, because I go out and do my clapping on a Thursday night, and the more I go out, the more I hear car horns and everything, and people now are really, really getting into all of the spirit of Alderney, so it's very important.
Yeah, I mean, it is, and it's amazing how, the way in which we can celebrate VE Day is the same way as we celebrate the sacrifices that are being made for us by everybody who puts themselves in harm's way with this virus. So, it just is a collective energy, and it's that collective energy, I genuinely think, which has driven us and put us in the place we're in now.
Lovely, William. Thank you. I know I'm going to stop it there because I know it's getting emotional for both of us, I think. So I will speak to you again very soon indeed.
Okay.
William, thank you very much indeed.
My pleasure.
Okay, bye for now. Bye.
Alderney's Key FM.